And good evening. My name is Denny Smith. Welcome to the show. You know, every so often I come across a story that just startles me. Tonight I'm going to introduce you to a couple of authors with a story to tell that did more than startle me. It scared me a little bit. Nearly 50 years ago, 3 hunters went into the woods around Cisco Grove in California. That's in and around Sacramento area. One of them got terribly lost and soon found himself all alone, in the dark, and being chased by a predator that was like none other than any of us could ever imagine. Well, to help me tell the story this evening are two fellows, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, authors of a new book, Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter. And Noe and Ruben, welcome to 93 WIBC in Central Indiana. It's good to have you boys.
Thank you very much, Dare, for inviting us. This is Ruben calling from the San Francisco Bay Area.
The San Francisco Bay Area. And Noe, where are you?
Yes, sir, Danny. Thank you for having us on with you tonight. Looking forward to one of the most amazing UFO stories that I have ever run across. and I'm calling in from South Texas along the Rio Grande.
Yeah, well, salute. All right. Now, before we get to the story, Noe, I'll just ask the quick question. How long have you guys been working together on UFO research?
Yes, Ruben and I, we've had the good fortune to have a partnership and a friendship that goes back almost 10 years. We started working. Our first book was a book called Mexico's Roswell, and it was based on a reported UFO mid-air collision between a small plane and a flying saucer over West Texas back in the 70s. So we started working on that about 2005, so we've had, it's been a great ride. We've been out doing field investigations in the middle of the Mexican desert on that case and many other places. So
well, this is
been
good.
A wild adventure.
It's good to have you both. Now, Ruben, let's go back to Friday, September 4, 1964. I was 12 years old at that time, Ruben. And this 26-year-old factory worker by the name of Donald Shrum heads into the woods to go hunting with his bow and 3 arrows. Now, get us started, Ruben, and tell us where Mr. Shrum went hunting that day.
Well, basically, both he and his 2 other friends were going to go deer hunting, and they went out to an area in a remote area of California. It's known as Cisco Grove. It's part of the Tahoe National Forest. Very mountainous area. And it runs close to the border, going toward Nevada. And they went hunting, and they basically at that time, Denny, they didn't have walkie-talkies or anything like that, but they kept each other in line of sight. And it was in a very mountainous area that where they had set up camp. As they all used bows and arrows, that was only permitted during that period for hunting deer. They each went their way, and Mr. Don Shrum went up to along a very rocky area as he climbed upward. And it started to get dark, and he basically wandered off too far from the campsite. So he then, as most hunters do, because it was getting very dark, he climbed up a tree, and from that he was seeking refuge to protect himself from predators, because in that area there we have a lot of mountain lions and bears. So,
you know, that's a big part of the story, Ruben, this tree climbing. Now, Noe, he was planning on hunting just that day, or was he planning on a longer time in the forest? Were they going to be there for 3 or 4 days, or was it just this one day that he was planning on hunting, Noe?
No, it was basically an overnight stay there. They had started early in the day on Friday. They had an extra long weekend. I believe it was a 3-day weekend. And so they had started early, and they hadn't had much luck finding prey. And then as it got dark, they were planning to all assemble back at the campsite that they had staked out earlier in the day. But as Ruben just mentioned, what happened is that all 3 of them got separated from each other. And before they realized it, it was nearly dark, and the 2 companions that went along with Mr. Shrum were able to just barely get back in touch with each other at the camp right before it got totally dark. So they reconnected and got back to camp. But Mr. Shrum, because he had gone out to the very end of this very long ravine and then found no way to cross across to the other side, he had to backtrack, and there was no way he could make it back to camp. It became obvious to him. And this was kind of an unfamiliar area for him. He had been out hunting in other parts around Sacramento, but in this place, he was worried of, like Ruben mentioned, he was worried of running into perhaps a bear or a mountain lion, and there was also the added danger that the terrain was very rocky and there were ravines,
right.
canyons.
He was once he found himself almost lost, he did exactly what most hunters do. He started climbing the ridge. Now, on the phone with me this evening, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte. They have written a book called Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter, and we're telling the story of one Donald Shrum, 26-year-old factory worker, and he headed in the woods to go hunting with his bow. Had 3 arrows. He went with a couple of companions. The companions make it back to campsite towards dark. But poor Mr. Shrum, we are about to tell you a story. Now, knowing the trees do have a lot to do with this story, he decided to spend the evening in the tree.
Right.
Now, is it common for guys there in California to just climb a tree and strap in?
Okay, well, the concept here, Denny, is the hunter needs to find a place that is sheltered and protected from predators and other dangers. So if you're going to find, a cave maybe, or a place between some boulders, some place where you can hole up for the night. But another option would be to go up in a tree. He had a military-style belt strapped around him, so he was able to strap that belt around one of the larger limbs up near the top to keep him in place, so that he won't fall down from there.
All right.
And so that was the option that he chose.
All right. Now, Ruben, how was he dressed? I don't know what the weather was like in September of 1964. In here in the fall, it would be a little bit chilly, but what was it like in Cisco Grove, California in 64, Ruben?
Well, as Noe was mentioning that they were Mr. Shrum was wearing a camouflage jacket and a hat. He did wear a T-shirt and just camouflage pants and that. He wasn't really prepared for very, very cold weather, but it does get during that time in the elevation, it does snow quite a bit. And something, I just want to go back on the point that what Noe was mentioning about the predators and bears. We just found we're always finding some new information every time in our investigations, and one of the things we just found out that what Don had shared with us was that when he climbed up that tree, he noticed that there were some bear claws.
Oh, good Lord!
Yeah, on the tree bark, and so bears do climb up trees. So he was nervously when he climbed up the tree, he looked around and to make sure there wasn't anything up there. So
on the phone with me this evening, Ruben Uriarte and Noe Torres. They are 2 UFO investigators. They have written a book called Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter. And it is the story of a hunter, a couple of, well, actually 3 guys, but one of them had a very special encounter. Now, this case has a lot of similarities, Noe, to other well-known UFO cases, including Barney and Betty Hill back in 1961. Now, that was Pascagoula, Mississippi. And then there's the Travis Walton abduction in 75 where he gets picked up and says, he encountered these people. But this one's not as well known. Why is this one sort of kept secret?
Well, it's very interesting, Denny. Actually, those 3 cases that you just mentioned were all worked by some of the most famous UFO investigators of the 1960s and 70s, including Dr. J. Ellen Hynek and Dr. James Harder, Dr. Anita Brothers. It was 3 cases that are very well known in the annals of UFO history. But the reason that Mr. Shrum's encounter that we're talking about tonight, the Cisco Grove encounter, the reason it didn't get the media exposure that the others do is because of the fact that he worked for an aerospace defense contractor in Sacramento, California, that actually the leading manufacturer of missiles and rockets for the U.S. military in the early 60s was the Aerojet Corporation. And Mr. Shrum was employed by Aerojet, in fact, won several awards with them for his work in welding and also painting the missiles, including the Polaris and the Triton missile systems.
So
and his work, because of its sensitive nature and being a defense contractor with the U.S. government, he did not want his identity to be known, and so he withheld that from the UFO investigation community. And therefore, you know, anytime you have a UFO story and you don't have an actual human being to attribute it to, that makes it less valuable to the media and in terms of exposing it. So that was the one element that hurt his story and made it be not as well known as the others.
Now, this is a great story, folks. When we come back, in addition to our conversation with Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte with their book, Aliens in the Forest, we've got some clips from original interviews that were done with Mr. Shrum. When we come back, we're going to have that, along with the continuing conversation with Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, right here on the Denny Smith Show on 93 WIBC. And good evening once again. My name's Denny Smith. You know, there is a band around our galaxy that's known as the Goldilocks Zone. For those of you who remember the story of Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, but just right to support life of some sort. I have always had a feeling that there was other life out there. I think you look up in the heavens sometimes and you say, golly, did God just leave us here all by ourselves, or is there other form of life? And again we hear stories, and whether it is the story of Betty and Barney Hill, who were abducted back in 1961, there's the very famous story of the Pascagoula, Mississippi incident in 73. Travis Walton was abducted in 75, and now we have learned from authors Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte of Aliens in the Forest. We're going back to 1964. 26-year-old factory worker Donald Shrum heads into the woods just to go hunting with a couple of his buddies. And what's about to happen to him is unbelievable. He is at the bottom of a ravine, and it's getting dark, and he knows he has to hook back up with his partners who he has lost. This is 64, before walkie-talkies. And they had lost sight of one another. His two buddies make it back to camp, but poor Donald Shrum climbs a ridge to get up high so that he can see. Now, we're about to play a clip for you that Noe and Ruben have come across. And Mr. Shrum is in the forest in the dark of night. He's up in a tall pine tree, and he sees something. Well, what did he see? Well, here's the audio clip.
And waved my arms and yelled and screamed, and finally that light started coming towards me. So I was really relieved then, because I thought it was a helicopter still, until it got within maybe 60 feet or yards. I'm not sure the distance at night. But it just hovered there with no sound. So then I panicked because I knew it was no helicopter. I thought it was something from outer space. But it looked like all I could see is about an 8-inch glow. So I thought it was just a little tiny flying saucer. Then I kind of panicked, and I threw my bow up in the tree again and hand walked out there, that limb, and got up in the tree. But then this light went a half circle around me over the canyon. Then I could see the whole shadow of the whole spacecraft, and that was just a light that was on the nose of it.
All right, now, I suppose that is the voice of Donald Shrum. Noe, where did these recordings come from? We're going to be listening to several of these recordings this evening. Where did these audio clips come from?
Okay, this was an exclusive interview that was conducted by my pal Ruben, who's on with us tonight. And he sat down. In fact, he spent several days at the Shrum residence talking to them about this case, gathering information about it. So, and later on in some of the clips, we'll hear Ruben in the background. Yeah, this.
I thought I recognized that voice, Noe. Yeah. All right, now, how long ago did this take place, Ruben? When did you do these interviews?
Oh, it was around 2005, right around in September. As Noe had mentioned, I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to stay over their home as a guest, and we went through the basically through the whole event. I just need to backtrack just a little bit, but the principal investigator that was involved in this case was Mr. Paul Cerny, who was who was at that time with NICAP, and that was the organization is known as the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And Denny, what happened was that Mr. Paul Cerny had all these documents that he had acquired based on his investigation, and so when
were those military documents, Ruben? Because that seemed to be the only one who'd really investigated it. Was it all military?
Yeah, we'll get into about the military and their involvement in this, Denny.
All right.
But what happened here was that Mr. Paul Cerny was later he passed away back in the year 2000, and I became the Northern California director for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and I acquired a number of his archives, and in that was all his field notes and documents of this extraordinary case, which through some other, and I told myself, I said, one of these days I need to meet this gentleman, and who had this strange encounter. So through some very opportunities, through these connections that I was able to make, was able to meet with them, and they allowed me to stay at their home, and their son did the videotaping, and out of that we were able to acquire these audio clips.
This is just phenomenal, Ruben. Now, a lot of people don't know, when these things get buried in notebooks or when they get buried in research, digging them back out and then trying to find the players and find where they were. Did he live basically in the same place all this time, or had he moved around a bit? Did you have trouble finding him?
Oh, no, actually, what was interesting, their home, it was approximately about 45 minutes away from the actual site where the incident had happened.
If I'd have been him, I'd have moved to Mississippi. I'd have got us so far away from that place. Oh, my God.
Actually, him and his family have now relocated somewhere back in the Midwest, but we're always in contact. So I just definitely wanted to give you an overview of how we got connected, and then through my work with Noe, and thanks to him, we were able to put this into a book.
All right, now Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte, you just heard the voice of Ruben. Noe Torres is with him. Aliens in the Forest is the name of this book. Now, Noe, did Mr. Shrum's hunting companions, now, we just heard this clip where he says he saw this, and of course, he's lost. He lit 3 fires, which is what you're taught to do, to light 3 signal fires. And he's waving between 2 of these fires, and all of a sudden, what he thinks is a helicopter isn't a helicopter, and he probably didn't have solid stools for a month after that. But that being said, did anybody else see this mothership of sorts come over?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Denny. The ship, as it got close, because of his familiarity with military air vehicles and working for a defense contractor, he knew for certain that this was not one of ours, And when the ship first came through the Earth's atmosphere and appeared down below over the forest, it was seen by one of the other hunters. Mr. Alvarez was one of the companions, and he later filed an affidavit, a written affidavit, in which he stated that he saw the ship descend out of the atmosphere and came down, and he saw it hovering over in a little bit far away from where he was standing, Vincent Alvarez, and actually where it was hovering, of course, was over at the location where Don Shrum was up in a tree. So he witnessed the entrance of the mothership into the scene.
Now, we're talking about the mothership that has visited our hunter friend. His name is Donald Shrum. On the phone with me, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte. They have written a book called Aliens in the Forest, and I tell you what, it's a terrific tale. By the time we get done, I know that you're going to want to learn more about this. All right, Ruben, back to you. We know that there's a mothership. Danny's going to play another clip here, and all of a sudden, a second ship appears.
I saw 3 panels of light, like windows or whatever. I saw a flash come from the bottom of the center one, and just saw a dark object go down in the canyon, and then I lost track of it. Then the next thing I saw was a little blinking light up on the top of originally where the first one came from.
This object that you first saw that left the center panel, what did it look like, Don?
Well, at that time, all I saw was a flash and saw a dark object go down. When it landed up on the ridge, I could see like a half, I could only see part of the top, but it had a little light on it. Looked like the top of a flying saucer that I'd seen in pictures.
Like a dome? Or
yes.
Was it
yeah, like a dome.
Okay.
So I kept my eyes on that.
All right, so there's our clip number 2 from Donald Shrum, our hunter. Now, earlier today, Ruben, I sent this off to a couple of my classmates, and one of the guys listened to it, and he wrote back and he said, "Do you believe this guy?" Now, Ruben, before you tell me if you believe him, I'm going to tell you that at one point I had 1,200 plumbers working for me in 5 states, and I thought I was a pretty good judge of character when somebody was lying to me. I don't think this guy is lying. He seems as genuine as my dirty socks in the hamper back home. Tell me what your perception when you were interviewing. Did you get any body language that sensed that this man was deceiving you?
Well, the thing there's 2 points. One thing that really amazed me was the story that he shared with me was very much consistent with the overall interview that Mr. Paul Cerny had conducted back almost 40, 50 years ago. And so basically Don didn't miss much of a beat. I mean, he kept the story very much intact. But the other thing that really outstanding, that I found very outstanding and also kind of troubling too, was I could tell on his body language, his face, his expressions, that this really bothered him. He really went through a very, very shocking experience, and it still affects him today. He's still suffering from nightmares, and so having him relive the account with me, you could see that it troubled him very much.
You are hearing the voice of Ruben Uriarte, who has interviewed a gentleman. When we come back, we're going to meet the aliens as they make their appearance. My name's Denny Smith, along with new friends Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, right here on 93 WIBC. 93 WIBC. My name's Denny Smith. Thanks for being a part of the show. Tonight, we're talking about UFOs. And before you think that we're too far off in the giggle weeds, I want you to know that the two fellows that are joining me here this evening, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, they're the real deal, folks. These guys have been together for 10 years, and the research that they have done goes back to some research that was done many, many years ago, back in 1964-65, an original interview that was done by Paul Cerny. Mr. Cerny passes away in the year 2000, and he had interviewed a fellow who claimed to have seen a UFO, and not only that he had been pursued by aliens, and we will get to that part of the story. But before we do that, Noe, when we say that Donald Shrum saw a UFO, we need to put that in perspective. He later described the size of this mothership. Can you share with us just how big this thing was?
Yes, it was difficult for him at first to see the full extent of it, as we heard on the earlier audio clip from Mr. Shrum. But when it finally came around close to the tree, and he saw that this small light that he had been seeing for quite some time was actually only part of this immense structure. It was a cylindrical-shaped object about 150 feet in diameter. So in other words, it was like a 14-story tall building turned on its side, an immense object. The people that we've told this story to have commented that this is one of the largest ships that, it's not typical of a lot of UFO sightings where you have a much smaller craft. And then, of course, he saw these 3 large rectangular panels on the side of the hull, and then one of those, the middle one, out of the middle one came out this smaller ship, which is which is where the beings or the entities that he encounters next in the story, that's where they came out of.
Now, Reuben, Mr. Shrum must have been extremely concerned. I would say that just terrified, but he did not hear anything, did he, Reuben? Did he hear any noise from this craft at all?
Oh, no, he didn't. That's what frightened him. As he had mentioned, he saw this light, and when he later saw this immense object right above the tree, and he heard no noise, that's what really frightened him. And then he knew.
All right, now we're going to play another clip here, and this is when the humanoids, what he called, now there's a couple characters, folks. We have humanoids, and we're going to have some robots. The first ones to come out are going to be the humanoids. So let's hear what Mr. Shrum has to say about the humanoids.
I heard some thrashing through the brush, and probably 5-10 minutes, these two humanoids come out of the brush, and they kind of broke some of the brush off and was looking at it. And then they came straight underneath the tree and looked up at me. And I knew right then I was fingered.
They found you.
Yeah, they found me.
Can you describe them for us? That was briefly what they
Yeah, they looked like 4 to 5 feet. Of course, I'm looking down at them, so they'd be shorter than they probably are. And they had a silvery, like a one-piece suit on. And it seemed like it had the joints, puffy joints, on the shoulders and the elbows, and the legs I didn't see that clear.
The humanoids, were you able to see their faces?
No, it was just a kind of a dark shadow. I could see the two like eyes that looked like welding goggles to me. They were the same as welding goggles. And then the rest of the face was kind of a blur. I couldn't see looking down at them.
Was it large or small? They're
about 2 inches in diameter. It reminded me, just like I said, like a welding goggles.
You have just listened to an interview that took place back in 2005. One of our authors this evening, Reuben Uriarte, sat down and videoed and did some audio recording with Mr. Donald Shrum. Back on September 4, 1964, this 26-year-old factory worker just went into the woods to go hunting. He took his bow, a few arrows. He was in complete camouflage, and he ended up encountering something beyond this world. Now, Noe, did the humanoids make any aggressive moves towards Donald Shrum? Were they carrying any weapons?
Mr. Shrum observed that they appeared to be carrying no kind of tools or instrumentation or weaponry of any kind, and they made no aggressive moves toward him during the first part of the encounter. And another, just an interesting sidelight here, Denny, if I could just take a moment. There's a lot of similarities between this and the Travis Walton encounter, because Travis Walton was abducted from a forest in northern Arizona, and he found himself aboard this craft, and he saw two distinctly different types of beings, just as Mr. Shrum saw two different types of beings. And Walton also classified one of the two as being more humanoid than the others. The others were shorter and stockier. And the other interesting correlation between these two cases is that Travis, and I just spoke to him recently, we had a UFO conference here in Laredo, Texas, and he talks about how captivating those dark, round eyes of the beings that he saw aboard the craft, they burned into his mind, so to speak. And Mr. Shrum described later in his interview, he described the very same thing about how the eyes of these creatures just kind of just frightened him a great deal, and he kept that memory very vivid in his mind for the rest of his life.
I can remember the first time I got called into the principal's office, and I can tell you what color the principal's eyes were, and I can tell you just about how many whiskers he had on his face. When you are in trouble, there's something about your senses that starts to drink it in, and it just burns into your mind. Now, Reuben, what happened after the humanoids arrived on the scene? What was going on down there?
Well, as Noe had mentioned, they weren't carrying any instrumentation, but one of the things that Mr. Shrum noticed was that they were very curious, these humanoids were very curious in studying the plant life around there. You know, the manzanita bushes, the rocks, almost like scientists. And then he noticed that they start walking over toward the tree, toward him, and then another being started to also walk in that direction, which, as Noe had mentioned, it was a robot-like creature.
That's exactly, yeah. And when we come back, we're gonna meet this robot. On the phone with me this evening, Ruben Uriarte and Noe Torres. They have written a book called Aliens in the Forest. We are blessed that in 2005, Ruben sat down with the protagonist in this, a fellow by the name of Donald Shrum. He was 26 years old at the time. That would make him, what, 74 or 75 now? But,
yeah, he's about 74, 75.
74,
right?
75. All right, when we come back, we're going to meet the robot. My name's Denny Smith, along with my buddies from Aliens in the Forest right here on 93 WIBC. Well, my name's Denny Smith, and I tell you what, it's rare that I get a chance to talk to the real deal. Tonight on the phone with me, Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte. They're the real deal. They have done their own investigation of a story that goes back to 1964. A hunter by the name of Donald Shrum heads off to go hunting with his bow and arrows, and the rest is a story for the ages. Now, we're about to meet, we've already met the humanoids who have come out of a mothership that is 18 stories wide. There's a couple of other ships that come out, and they deliver a couple what we are going to describe as scientists. They are looking at the plant life. They have certainly noticed that our hunter is up in the tree, shivering like a dog passing fish hooks, I'm sure, but he's fully clothed in camouflage. And then all of a sudden we have somebody new arrive on the scene, and here's what our hunter had to say.
Then I saw two flashing red-orange light eyes just picking its way down the ridge, just between the rocks and around them and everything, and come down and was on this big boulder, this big flat rock. He kind of looked up at me and he moved his hand in this through the fires, cinders, and kind of scattered them.
The eyes of this other creature, like the robot, what did that look like to you?
It had kind of like fire. Orangish, reddish orange, or yellowish orange, and it kind of flickered like fire. And they're about the same diameter as about 2 inches in diameter as the humanoids.
Boy, this is the most amazing of stories. My name's Denny Smith. Joining me this evening are UFO investigators Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte. Now, Ruben, when you, I'm going to come back to this interview that you did with Donald Shrum. Did you sense any deception at all from Mr. Shrum when you were interviewing him?
Oh, none whatsoever. You know, I used to work as a counselor. I work a lot with people, with many clients, and so I have a pretty good judge of character working with people, and at the same time just reading his body language and also how it affected his family. His wife was very, very much supportive of him, and it affected her as well as their family. So they had no reason to make up a hoax, and and the story is so incredible. It's even better than science fiction, but at the same time, it really makes you wonder if how there might be more other visitors from visiting our planet.
If you have just joined us, on the phone with me this evening is Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte. They are authors of a book called Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter. And this all came about from notes from an original interview that was done by Paul Cerny, who was part of NICAP, and that was it's a UFO organization before MUFON. He died in 2000, but he left his notes. Ruben acquired the post or the position that Paul Cerny used to have, and he figured out that this guy might still be alive, this Donald Shrum, the hunter that has seen and has been telling us this story that you've been hearing by tape. Now, Noe, do you think Mr. Shrum believed this being was a mechanical man, or could it have been a humanoid, another one of the humanoids, just wearing some kind of bulky suit?
Okay, that's a very good question, and I've heard, I listened very carefully to the original interview done by Mr. Cerny back within months of the encounter, And I've also listened to the interviews done more recently with Mr. Shrum, including the one that Ruben, that we've taken audio clips from and are listening to tonight. And Mr. Shrum is very clear in saying that he's not 100% certain that this was a mechanical creature. That was just simply the impression, the overall impression of the creature's movements. He moved a little bit more stiffly than the humanoids. He seemed to be, the creature seemed to be, have a little more of a metallic appearance. However, he has said during several interviews that it could very well have been just another one of the same type of being, the humanoid, in a bulkier type of suit. So that's possible.
I sense that he described this suit somewhat like we would send in a bomb technician or somebody who is going into an inferno, a very metallic type suit with this big bulky hood. I haven't seen any pictures, but from the descriptions that I've heard in all these interviews, that's what it sounds like. Was it a big, massive, 7-8 foot type creature, or was it more 4 or 5 foot in size?
That was more in the range of 4 or 5 feet tall. He did not describe the robot-type creature as being significantly larger than the humanoids, just a little bit bulkier, walked a little bit more stiffly, and just gave the impression of being a manufactured or mechanical creature.
Ruben, before we go into the news, did Mr. Shrum feel like he was being pursued? Did he feel like he was the hunted in this case?
Oh, yes. And in fact, after we get back from the news, it really gets interesting, where then comes where both the robot and the two humanoids are trying to capture him.
Yeah, this is an interesting story. Joining me on the phone this evening, Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte. We were talking about an encounter in Cisco Grove, which is over off of the border of California and Nevada. Great hunting, very much a wilderness. We have a hunter by the name of Donald Shrum who gets separated from 2 of his hunting partners. He's on a high ridge. He has set 3 signal fires because he knew he was in trouble. He was in a strange land, and with his military background, he knew that setting 3 signal fires would be a good way to attract attention. Indeed, he did, but the attention he attracted was not a helicopter. It was not of this world. It was from another world. When we come back, we're going to meet these robots face to face, find out if they're friendly or aggressive, and let me just give you a forewarning. They're not very friendly. My name's Denny Smith, along with Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, right here on 93 WIBC. This evening, we are talking to a couple of UFO investigators. They're the real deal, folks. Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte. They've written a book called Aliens in the Forest. It is the story of a young hunter who was 26 years old at the time. If I've added it up correctly, that means he's about 74 or 75 now. He gave an interview very early on with a fellow who has now gone home to God. His name was Paul Cerny, and he was with NICAP, and he had done an original interview with this gentleman. His name is Donald Shrum, and then follow-up interviews were taken, and they matched the story even after the passage of years, which gives it so much credibility. Noe, here we are with this robot creature who is starting to show some aggression towards Mr. Shrum. Did he expect aggression from conversations or from your investigation? Did he feel threatened at all times through this process?
Mr. Shrum said that he was hoping that there would be no aggression toward him, of course, because of the fact that he was hiding up in the tree and was out of their direct line of sight. And even though they had taken notice of him early on, they didn't seem to be at that point too concerned with him. In fact, he mentioned that they went about their business of looking at the surrounding vegetation, breaking off little pieces of it, the humanoids did. And then the appearing on the scene was this strange mechanical-looking creature. And meantime, there's a key element here, and that is that it appears that there were both visible and audible signals being exchanged both among the creatures themselves and also between the mothership, whoever was aboard the mothership, and the creatures down on the the ground below. So,
Reuben, was that the cooing or the hoot owl things that I have read about? Was that with the owl noises?
Yes, what Don had referred that. It reminded him of almost like an owl. The sounds of reminded him of that very, very much.
All right, so now we have this robot creature, and he's really the first one to show any aggression towards Mr. Shrum. This is what took place.
He was about 7 feet from me. He touched his mouth, and kind of a steam vapor come out of his mouth, and it lit up his face so I could see some detail. I blacked out when that steam hit me. I guess it was kind of took the air from me, and I'd gasp for air and then black out, and I fell over my bow. And that's the only thing that kept me in the tree. So I figured they were out to get me then.
All right, now to reset this, our hunter, once he felt threatened, started climbing this pine tree, and he's pretty far up in this pine tree. Reuben, what did Mr. Shrum think these creatures were trying to do to him, and how did he react to the gassing?
Well, as he mentioned, that he blacked out, and when he recovered, he noticed that the humanoids then all of a sudden were trying to climb up the tree, and that really frightened him. And then he climbed up further up the tree, and then from there, it turned out to be his own personal war of the worlds between the humanoids, the robot, and himself. He then later started to break off the branches. He had matches, and he started to throw it down at the base of down at where the humanoids were standing. But the thing that really gets interesting is that he then uses his arrows.
Oh, he uses his bow and arrow. He's got his bow and arrow now.
Yes.
Well, this might be a good time to go to this next clip. Let's sort of pull this one up. This is a clip of where he talks about this aggression and how he responds to it. Our own Donald Shrum in his own voice.
I had a 60-pound bow, which is a very high velocity. Seeing as how the robot's the only thing that was causing me harm, I shot the chest area, and it has the velocity of a rifle at that distance, because I'm only about 7-8 feet from him. And when I hit the chest, the sparks would fly like like an arc welder kind of. And then that robot backed up and almost knocked him down. He kind of fell back against a rock, and the two at the bottom took off and headed for the brush and stood out there about 30 feet from me. And then I shot 2 more arrows, and it was about the same time sequence that these 2 humanoids would, every time I'd shoot, they'd go back up into the brush, just almost out of sight from me.
That's the voice of Donald Shrum, a hunter who is being pursued by a group of UFOs. We have a mothership that's in the neighborhood of 150 feet long and wide. We have a couple of other ships that have joined the fray, and they have delivered 2 humanoids that are pursuing him at the base of a tree where he has been lost and separated from his hunting partners. He lit 3 fires in thinking that he was attracting a helicopter. He realizes he's attracted a UFO. And he has now climbed the tree. He's been pursued by the humanoids. He now has a robot of sorts who's tried to gas him, actually knocked him out. He woke up and went on from there. Now, Reuben, after the arrows were gone, what did he do next?
Well, he, being an experienced hunter, he carried a lot of matches with him, and he started to break off the branches, threw them down at the humanoids, and the humanoids were a little frightened by the fire, and they would stand back. He then, because the tree was so barren, as he started climbing up further, he started to light his clothes. I mean, he lit his hat on fire, would throw it down. He even threw his canteen down at the humanoids. And one of the things that he said, that when the canteen hit the ground, that one of the humanoids went up and picked up the canteen, looked at it, and then threw it back on the ground.
That is the voice of Ruben Uriarte. He's an investigator. He, along with his partner Noe Torres, have written a book, Aliens in the Forest. Noe, I'm going to come to you. One of the things I'm struck about is that we have two humanoids who seem to be protected. We've got the scientists, and then we sort of have the soldiers. Do you get the feeling that the robots are designed to be aggressive, that they are the ones that are sort of the aggressors in this case, and the other ones are just sort of standing back? Because every time something happens, the two humanoids head for the woods. Did I pick that up in the story correctly?
That's correct. And the other part of it, as we just briefly mentioned earlier, is that there was some kind of signaling going on from the mothership to these beings. And Mr. Shrum told us that it was his distinct impression that whenever these sounds that sounded like either an owl hooting or a bird cooing, there were these strange noises. He got the impression that every time he'd hear those noises, the behavior of these creatures would change. For example, they would start to try to climb the tree, the humanoids would, or the robots would come closer and emit more gas up into the tree.
One of the things that I've picked up about him, now you guys have met him, but Noe, he just seems incredibly able and resourceful. I would have had the holy bejeebers scared out of me. I don't know how I would have reacted, but he seemed so cool and calm on his feet with all the things that he has done. Did you sense that he was acting out of fear? There was a lot of thought process in what he was doing here.
He told us that at the point where it became clear that they were out to get him, as he put it in that video clip we heard a while ago, at that point he was determined in his mind to somehow make it back home to his recently, the lady that he had recently married, loved very much, and their young 1-year-old daughter. He was despairing at many times during the encounter. It seemed that there was no way that he could hold off these strange beings from grabbing him, but always in the back of his mind was this strong determination to make it back home to his wife and little girl.
That's the voice of Ruben Torres. Now, when we come back, in his own words, we're going to listen to Donald Shrum talk about what he did to fight off the two humanoid aliens, along with what I'm just going to call the monster robots that were attacking him, both with gas, and we will find out what else. When we come back, we'll hear from Donald Shrum in his own words. How do you fight an alien? Well, you're going to hear firsthand what they did back in 1964. My name's Denny Smith, along with Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, right here on 93 WIBC. 93 WIBC, good evening. My name's Denny Smith. For those of you who are Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, for those of you who are hunters, mushroomers, anybody just goes out in the woods, there is not a day in my life that I cherish more than the time that I have been out in the woods enjoying all of God's nature. Tonight we're learning the story of a man who probably was doing exactly the same. He was a bow hunter, and back in the Cisco Grove area of California, Nevada, right at the border, just a little bit east of Sacramento, was a fellow by the name of Donald Shrum. He was a hunter. Back in '64, he entered the woods with 3 friends. They all were hunting deer and game. They were bow hunters. 2 of the friends made it to the base camp, and poor Don Shrum did not. He ended up on a ridge, and he knew that he was a little bit in trouble, so he set 3 signal fires when he saw some distant lights. He lit those fires and attracted as much attention as he could. And as the lights were coming closer, his spirits lifted, thinking that it was a helicopter. And then he had the holy bejeebers scared out of him when he realized that it was not a helicopter. It was absolutely silent, about a 14-story building on its side. It was cylindrical in shape. It was indeed a UFO, and 3 lights, panels on the side. Out of the center one comes another ship. and delivers down to him 2 humanoids. At that point, he scales a tree. What we are about to listen to here is exactly what takes place after he is gassed. Now, before we listen to this next clip, which is the longest of our clips and probably our last clip, Noe, it seems to me that they were trying to gas him. Do you think that they wanted to kill him?
One of the things that becomes very clear in talking to Mr. Shrum is he did not feel that they were trying to hurt him. They were very obviously using an asphyxiant, which basically what it does is suck the oxygen content out from the surrounding air. So an asphyxiant, like the typical ones that we think of, are nitrogen, argon, helium. Those are probably the most common ones. What they do is they can cause you to black out, and of course, deprived of oxygen long enough, they can do damage. But generally speaking, they're not toxic at all. So it's significant to note that he really strongly felt they were trying to get at him. They felt that they wanted him for experimentation as a specimen or something along that order, but he did not feel that they were trying to kill him because of the fact that they kept trying to knock him unconscious and then climb the tree to get at him.
Now, we're about to listen to a tape and it's a longer tape, but this is how he fights them off. And again, Ruben, you've met this man face to face. You've interviewed him. He must have been the most creative guy in the world. I mean, all of the things that he has thrown at him. When he was giving you this part of the interview, did you watch his facial features? How did he behave as he was giving you this part of the interview?
Oh, absolutely. I was watching him, and as he was telling me this incredible story, and as I had mentioned earlier, how hard this has been for him. He was very much. You could see it in his eyes, how he was coming across in his voice, and he was reliving that whole event, and just seeing him. And it just made me, I was just at awe. I said, what was it like to be in his shoes, being up in that tree, encountering a force from the unknown? I said, this man was using all the resources. He was just a very, very brave man.
He was brave beyond brave. That was the voice of Ruben Uriarte. Also on the phone with me, Noe Torres. They have written this book called Aliens in the Forest, and it is the story of this hunter. Now, we are going to hear the clip now of after he ran out of arrows. Remember, he has a 60-pound bow. He had 3 arrows. He shot at the robot 3 times. Each time the arrow would impact the metallic structure of his chest, he said he was shooting for the heart. Sparks would fly as if it were a welder. Now, those of you who are welding know what type of spark that would be. He said it would light up everything. It was a very bright arcing. Now, he runs out of arrows, and that's when the fun begins. So let's listen to this clip of what old Don Shrum did after he ran out of arrows.
I ran out of arrows, so I only had 3 left. That's when pomade hair is just, I mean, the cap I had on was just soaked with oil.
This is for your hair?
Yeah, from my hair, yeah, pomade. I always carried all kinds of books of matches with me when I hunted. And so I lit that cap, and it just blazed up, and I dropped it down the base of the tree. And just in that instant, they moved back about 12, 15 feet, and I glanced over at the ship that was over the canyon, kind of almost level with me, and it was almost out of sight. It was just like a star. It moved that fast. Just in that second. So then I got the idea that they're scared of fire. So I burned everything but my T-shirt and my jeans. And come to find out later on that it was 32 degrees out, and I was shaking, and I had a bunch of change, and I threw it down, and they all kind of gathered around it. Well, after I started burning stuff and throwing it down, and I even tied some of my shirt that I ripped up to a compass so I could try to hit some brush because there wasn't nothing right underneath the tree. I caught a little pile of brush on fire. I figured that would bring the cavalry. That when I run out of stuff to burn, I headed for the top of the tree. I broke off the top and threw it down, and anytime I throw down or shake the tree, these humanoids would back up.
All right, there you have it. That is Donald Shrum talking about how you fight an alien. I don't know what I would do. Now, Noe, this battle went on all night long, and one of the things that I was touched by, he did not seem to be cold, which would tell me that he was in full flush of adrenaline fighting these rascals. Did he ever talk about how cold it was?
He felt the intense cold afterward, but at the time, of course, this was a battle of wills, a battle for survival, and he really felt that if these guys got a hold of him, he would never see his family again.
Boy, now, Reuben, he talked about, and he lit this fire, and he tied it to a compass that he was carrying, which is very typical of hunters. You know, we always carry a compass with us in case we get lost, and we can follow a dead line back to a road or whatever. Now, he throws us down and he catches this fire. What he said was that the mothership took off like a bolt. And can you tell me again what took place? It sounded to me like it was instantaneous. That mothership was gone in a flash. Did I get that part right?
Yes, it moved very, very rapidly, almost out of sight, and then also the aliens were very much in fear of the fire, and Don, as we mentioned earlier, he used his wits, and he used the bow, and he used fire. I mean, mankind's primitive weapons against a highly advanced technology.
We have to believe, do we not, Reuben, that these people could have destroyed that site in a heartbeat. They have to have some sort of weapon. Do you think that they wanted to harm him in any way?
Oh, they could have. That's what Noe and I have been discussing all along, and then also with Mr. Shrum and the family, is if they really wanted to get him, they could have captured him. That's what makes this case much more unusual, is the fact that in many of the other UFO cases that involves abductions, most of these people are taken, against their will and and unconscious. The thing that makes this case mostly unique is the fact that he was conscious and that he did battle them for almost 12 hours.
Joining me on the phone this evening, Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte. They have written a book that I hope you will gather into your possessions. It's called Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter. Now, this battle went on all night long, Noe. Did he ever sleep? Do you remember anything about him getting any rest throughout the evening?
He was not able to sleep at all. In fact, after it was all over and he did find his way back to camp, he slept for 6 hours straight in an attempt to, recover his wits.
Wow. When we come back, we're going to finish up this story with Noe and Ruben. You may have a question for these two fellows, and we're going to, through all of the technical expertise that we can muster, we're going to open up the phones for all of you. We're going to finish telling the story, then we'll get to your questions. So if you have one, it's 239-9393. It is 1-800-571-WIBC. That's 1-800-571-9422. If you're driving around, you have a Verizon cell phone, it's just pound 9393. When we come back, we're going to figure out what happens. Did he end up on that spaceship? What happened to our poor hunter friend Donald Shrum? Well, my name's Denny Smith, along with Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte, right here on 93 WIBC. 93 WIBC, my name's Denny Smith. When the Pacers do a Western Road show, that means we get a little bit more time on air with you, and I'm looking forward to it. Tomorrow evening, we're going to have a retired senior FBI criminal profiler. Her name's Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole, and we're going to talk about the risks and that are to you about your gut reactions to things. So many times we depend on our gut, and I have to tell you, I've done that most of my life, gone with my gut reaction. Tomorrow evening, you're going to hear a reason why you may not always want to go with your gut. When we talk to Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole, she is an FBI senior criminal profiler, retired. But this evening, we're talking about UFOs. And a lot of people make fun of me and really give me a hard time about this UFO thing. I've always believed that maybe it's like Ed says, that there's this Goldilocks part of the universe. Goldilocks meaning it's not too hot and it's not too cold. And I think it's reasonable for us to believe that there might be other life besides what is here on the good old Earth. Third rock from the sun. I have to believe there is. And the fellows that have joined me here this evening, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, they're telling the story of a hunter back in 1964. Now, this hunter is probably 74, 75 years old now. His life changed forever back in September 1964. And so I think I'm going to go to Noe here first. Noe, this battle goes on all night long. What finally happened in the end?
Well, in the end, there appeared to be more communication between the mothership and these beings. And then all of a sudden, a second robot-like creature appeared on the scene.
Now, this is one of the bad guys. I mean, the one that's starting to show aggression. We've got two of these guys now?
Right.
All right.
Now, the first one had already attempted to gas, or actually had gassed Mr. Shrum several times, while the humanoids attempted to climb the tree and get him, but he was able to fight them off. He would awaken fairly quickly after the gassing, and then he'd fight off the humanoids by kicking at them and shaking the tree. But then along comes robot number 2, and it joins its companion, the first robot, at the base of the tree. The two robots face each other, and then this blinding flash of light that looks like lightning comes out of the chest of one of the robots and strikes the other robot directly in the chest and gets bounced back and forth, forming an arc pattern of light between them. It lit up the whole area all around them, and Mr. Shrum says later in his interview that he was able to finally get the best look that he had ever gotten at the robots and their features.
Were they trying to burn the tree down?
No, it's unclear what the function of the arcing light between them was, but at the same time that this was going on, a huge cloud of vapor, much more than had been previously being released by the single robot, came up from between the two of them and came up and engulfed the tree in this big cloud of vapor, and he was finally knocked out for the last time. And the duration of this period of unconsciousness was much longer, possibly several hours. And then when he finally awoke from that final gassing, they were gone, and everything was quiet and at peace again.
That's the voice of Noe Torres. Now, Ruben Uriarte, why didn't he fall out of the tree? If he was gassed and he was knocked out, why didn't he fall out of the tree?
Well, one of the things that he did was when he climbed up to the very top, he wrapped his canteen belt around the trunk of the tree. So as Noe had mentioned, when he was gassed by these two robot creatures and he was knocked out for a period of time, in the morning he found himself just dangling. And when he came to, that's when he started to climb down from the tree.
Now, he was, at this point, Ruben, he was in a T-shirt and his blue jeans. That's all he had that he had not burned up. Is that correct?
That's correct. And later, he was able to get back to the campsite, and as Noe had mentioned, one of his buddies found him, and then he went back to the campsite, and he slept there. He slept for about 6 hours.
All right, these two robots come together, Noe. They gas him one last time. Then they beat it out of there. Now, when he came down out of the tree, did he just run like hell, or what did he do when he got to the bottom of the tree?
He was extremely concerned that they might still be in the area. In fact, he caught sight of something in the brush, and he scrambled back up the tree and stayed up there for quite a bit longer, and until he realized that they were not around anymore. So he came on down. He saw some of the things that he had thrown down during the night, during the encounter. He found them on the ground.
Did he find his compass?
Found his compass, found one of the arrows.
He threw all of his pocket change down there. Did he find any of the coins?
The coins were missing, interestingly enough, and he told us that he later talked to some people who suggested that coins tell a lot about a society. For instance, they have dates on them, the names of people. They have faces of persons. And perhaps they took the coins as kind of a specimen or a scientific token of their visit to our planet on that occasion. So that's what Mr. Shrum feels might account for the missing coins.
All right. Noe Torres, Ruben Uriarte, I'm about to introduce you to the listeners of 93 WIBC. We're going to start taking some calls here. So, Danny, the first one we're going to punch up is Kevin, who's calling from right downtown Indianapolis. Good evening, Kevin. How are you?
Good evening, Denny. How are you?
All right. What's your question for these fellas?
Two quick questions. One is, why aren't we getting this information from I don't know, government or people that want to make this public? Who's suppressing this from us? And the second question I have is, has the gentleman ever been able to relocate that tree in that area? Was there an investigation? Thank you. I'll take the answer off the air.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. All right. Well, that's a great question. Let's talk about that, guys. Let's take the second question first. Did he ever go back and try to find the tree with his buddies, or did he just get out of there and never to go back?
He never had the inclination to go. He was very, very frightened. He never hunted after that. He's told us that it ruined his career as a hunter. And in fact, the other two gentlemen that were with him were also, their careers as hunters were ruined by this. It affected them that deeply. Of course, the other two hunters, one of them saw the ship coming down out of the atmosphere, and the other saw how shaken Mr. Shrum was when he finally did make it back to camp. So he really had no urge to go back. They did, and I have to backtrack here. He did go with his brother and a few others to take pictures of the scene about 2 or 3 weeks after the encounter. They did go back, they took pictures, but after that one return visit, shortly after the incident, they never did, he never has gone back.
All right, thank you, Noe. Ruben, did you get the feeling that it's my understanding there was an interview that was done by the Air Force or by somebody from the government, and the second question was, why was this suppressed? Do you believe it was suppressed? Do you believe that they tried to make some baloney explanation, or do you feel like it was a straightforward investigation by the authorities?
Well, basically that's what happened, was that after the event, Mr. Shrum's mother had encouraged him to speak to an astronomer, which later the astronomer encouraged him to go and speak to the Air Force. So both he and his wife went to a air base here in Sacramento, and they met with two Air Force officials, which we found out later that they were connected with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which happened to be a part of the intelligence network that were involved in investigating UFOs. So what happened was they went through the interview process, and that the officials basically were not taking his testimony seriously. In fact, they were suggesting that perhaps it could have been some teenagers that were out there creating a hoax, or some renegade Japanese soldiers that were hiding in the forest. They made up a bunch of bogus.
In '64, renegade Japanese?
Yes.
Okay. Well, all right. Let's. That's. God bless the government for that one. All right. Let's grab another call here. We've got Randy up next, who's on a cell phone. Let's pull him up here. Hey, Randy, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
All right. What's your question for Ruben and for Noe?
Well, I was curious, since he was an outdoorsman, did he understood these were like bird calls? Did he try to communicate in any sort of way?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I had heard that there were coyotes yelping. Was this tell me how the coyotes came into all this.
This is a very interesting part of the story, that he heard there were coyotes noises out in the distance in the nearby woods. And so Mr. Shrum, and this tells you how focused he was on surviving this incident, what he decided to do was he himself imitated the call of coyotes. And his thought was that perhaps these alien beings would think that he had friends out in the woods coming toward him to rescue him. So in other words, he wanted to sound like a coyote so that they would think he was with those coyotes that were off in the distance.
Unbelievable.
He was part of their team.
Absolutely unbelievable. That's the voice of Noe Torres along with Ruben Uriarte. When we come back, we'll wrap up this story, get a few more of your calls in here, and then tell you how you can learn more. We've even got an Indiana link for you for those of you who are interested in MUFON. Ruben has been kind enough to send us a link, and we will tell you what that is. You're listening to The Denny Smith Show. My name's Denny Smith, along with Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, right here on 93 WIBC. Well, my name's Denny Smith. I have enjoyed meeting a couple of fellows, one from the California area, one from South Texas. That's where Noe Torres is from. Ruben Uriarte from out the great state of California. Gentlemen, I have enjoyed your company. Ruben, I want to go right back to you and ask you a quick question that's based on our next caller. So let's get Dale up here next. He's from the south side of Indianapolis. Dale, good evening. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. What question do you have for Noe and Ruben?
Well, I'd kind of like to ask them if any of them got sick with any kind of radiation or any kind of bacteria, because it seemed to me like if these people come from another world, they'd be carrying something or they'd be taking something back.
You know, that's exactly where I was going to go with Ruben. Ruben, did Don Shrum, our 26-year-old hunter who just shows up in the woods and then spends a night in the tree, with all of this gassing, with all of the contact with these robots, you know, within close proximity, and then our two humanoids, did he ever have any serious health effects from all of this?
Well, physically, one of the issues that he had was respiratory, and it could have been from the asphyxiants that the aliens were using in terms of the vapor to knock him out, or also because he worked around chemicals at the Aerojet plant because he was a welder. But the other thing that he did suffer quite a bit was he had, of course, nightmares for approximately 2 years. And he did have fear that he might have been exposed to radiation, but fortunately, none of the symptoms. He didn't encounter any radiation symptoms afterwards. But the thing that he did encounter is the obvious signs of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And this is what he has had to deal with all through today.
Did he speak of nightmares? Did he just speak of anxiety? When you say
he would wake up and say, "Those eyes."
Oh boy!
So it really got to him.
It's sort of gotten to me. Now, I just got a text from my neighbor. She's got 3 daughters. And one of them, Hannah, has said it's too much for her. She's scared out of her wits, and she stopped listening. So I have to assume that even just hearing this story has got to be frightening. But here I am, I'm getting ready for my 7th decade, and this has really gotten my attention. Noe, here's the thing I want to ask you. If people want to learn more about incidents such as Donald Shrum, do you guys have a website where people can find out more about these type of things?
We have a lot of information on our website. We've got eyewitness testimony from Mr. Shrum and from the other eyewitnesses in the other cases that we've investigated at roswellbooks.com.
Roswell, spell it for us.
It's ROSWELL books.com. And Ruben and I have put together six books on major historical UFO cases. So we've got quite a wealth of information there. We have video clips, audio clips, and text information. I think folks would really enjoy that. And of course, they'll also have an opportunity if they choose to purchase some of our books as well.
Right. Let's talk about one of those books. Ruben, this latest book, Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter. What's the best way for folks to get that, Ruben?
Well, you had mentioned one way is going through to our website, roswellbooks.com. It could also go to any other major online booksellers, and especially Amazon.com if they're interested in purchasing the book. And we encourage everybody who's interested in please take a look at this book and also the other books that we have written, and also a plug for MUFON.com. For those that are interested in furthering exploration into the whole UFO phenomena, we have a very large chapter in Indiana, and I'd like to encourage those folks that live locally to attend. I believe they have meetings here in Indianapolis.
Yes, folks, there's no www. Just after the 2 // type in indianamufon.homestead.com. homestead.com. And for those of you who want to learn more about this, that is a good place to start. http://Indiana MUFON, MUFON.homestead.com. Hey, real quick, Noe, before I let you go, in this situation, did anybody ever do any what I call police drawings, or did anybody do any graphical depictions of what the humanoids or the monsters, the robots looked like?
Yes, actually, we have over 100 graphics in the book, many of which were drawn by the witness himself, Mr. Shrum, and then some actual artists, professional artists, took what he drew and enhanced it. But we included both of Mr. Shrum's work as well as the artist's work in our book. So definitely it's looked at from many different angles.
All right, folks, there you go, RoswellBooks.com. Noe, Ruben, thank you so much. I think I'll be back in touch with you. I'm going to explore this just a little bit more and see some of these other stories that you have. But you guys are great storytellers, and I want to thank you both for your time. Ruben, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Denny, for having us on.
You bet. And Noe, thank you too, okay?
It was a pleasure, and thank you very much.
All right, and we'll be posting this at WIBC.com/Denny. We post these things, so I hope you'll be able to find them. So, fellas, thanks for all your time. Folks, tomorrow evening, I'm going to have an FBI retired senior profiler. Her name is Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole. Those times that you feel in your gut that somebody's all right, I'm going to give you a reason to maybe double clutch just a little bit and hear the darker side of criminal profiling. Well, my name's Denny Smith. I enjoy my evenings with you. We'll be back tomorrow evening right here on 93 WIBC.